What if fundraising's not just about the bottom line? What if it is about who you become and what you believe in the process? And what if the journey is bigger than you and your ministry?
Welcome to Season 4 of It's Not About the Money. Join us as we examine elements of ministry fundraising through the unique lens of personal formation. Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome back to It's Not About the Money. Today we are going to recap the conversation that Andy and I had with Mary Valloni. It was a great conversation and we are looking forward to talking about it in more depth. Andy, who do we have with us to help recap?
We have a good friend of ours by the name of Kenton. And well, first of all, we recorded this episode back in the fall. And so we've been sitting on it for a while.
Mary's episode?
Yes.
Yeah.
Waiting for the right time to release it. And
right.
So it's the spearhead of Season 4.
Woohoo!
So we invited one of our favorite people probably on the planet.
Yep.
Kenton. Kenton has been in overseas work for almost 25 years. We're going to round up and say 25 years. Throughout the 1040 window. So everywhere from like Southeast Asia to Middle East to Central Asia, just all over the place. And so thrilled to have his perspective, living on support for all that time as well, and to see what he brings to the conversation.
Mm-hmm. You know, I remember a conversation I had with somebody in office. We talked about making our own version of like Where's Waldo, except Where's Kenton, in all of these different cultures amongst all these different people, because he truly has seen
quite a Renaissance man.
Yes. Yeah. So welcome, Kenton.
So good to have you.
Thank you, guys. Where's Waldo, where's Kenton puzzle would be pretty easy because I stand at 6'5". And amongst Asian folks, it's pretty easy to spot Waldo named Kenton in that.
Yeah.
It's good to be with you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here. And no doubt, in the midst of recapping this conversation with Mary, we are certainly going to have an opportunity to hear more about your experiences, which I think will be really helpful. So, guys, let's just get started with what stood out from Mary's episode.
What I was struck by probably most was your comment, Heather, to Mary about Mary's choice of language usage regarding an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset. And sadly, the mindset for missionaries, I think probably since Paul, was that of scarcity, that you need enough to get by. And if you have a little extra, well, that's okay, but God has a use for that. We function for so many years from a poverty mindset even, that we fail to acknowledge the God of a cattle on 1,000 hills. I love Corrie ten Boom's reference when there would be a financial need in her ministry, and that need was met. She would say, well, praise the Lord, God just sold a cow.
Yeah.
And forget that we have the resources of heaven. There is no want in heaven, never has been, never will be. And there should be no want, certainly in our thinking, as we progress and move through this. And this isn't just a missionary thing. This is a church thing.
Yeah.
Poverty mindset versus abundance, and the abundance of God, certainly for God's purposes.
Yeah.
Missionary, it's not a glamorous position. We travel internationally, but we're not going to London or the Riviera or Paris.
Right.
We're going to Iraq and China and other, just nations that aren't on the jet setters list.
Right.
And there is a fine line between good stewardship and a poverty mentality.
Right.
I'm not saying we fly first class, guys. I mean, in fact, most organizations, we lock into what's your cheapest airfare. That's how we'll get you there. What's the lowest means that this can happen? That's good stewardship.
Yeah.
It's not a poverty mindset. It's simply quality stewardship.
And although it's at 6'4", you would probably benefit more than most people with a first-class ticket.
Well, I'd certainly like to think that, but it hasn't worked out particularly well. A number of years ago, a pastor of a church here in the States, they were in the early stages of a building campaign. And Pastor Charlie went before the congregation. He said, I have good news. We have the money. We just need to get it from you.
That is so great.
That's good.
It is. It is. And I'm actually going to jump from Mary's podcast to something that has served me through my 25 years of service overseas. And I will share up front that in 25 years, I have not had ministry debt. I have not had personal debt.
Wow.
I was mentored early on. I was in a church that did not teach poverty mentality, and certainly not for God's servants. When I was first called to the mission field, I told God, I will go gladly, but I am not going to write that support letter. I said, you give me a witty invention, you give me an idea, I will fund this. Guys, I know now I had the totally wrong idea, mentality. God is all about support, certainly on the mission field.
Yeah.
And I mentioned having been mentored. This was totally new to me. I told God that like 20 minutes after he called me to the foreign mission field. I was 37, so it wasn't the idiocy of youth. It was just the idiocy of not understanding God's finances. But a book called Fundraising, obviously a play on word on fundraising, by Betty Barnett, broke me out of this fear of writing that letter. And what she shared was that when the call of God went forth to you as an overseas worker, a call of God went forth to everyone who will support you financially through all the season that you are abroad.
Good.
And once I realized that on January 18th, 1999, about 9 o'clock at night, when God put the nation of China on my heart, he simultaneously issued calls to people who didn't even know me at that point, who would come into my ministry and come into my support base, perhaps the next day, perhaps years later. That there would be the connections. And guys, that opened I got out of my scarcity mindset, my poverty mindset, and into abundance, and just looking for what and where is the answers.
And Heather, isn't it strange to hear him say that he was afraid to write his newsletter?
Yes.
Looking back now at the prolific, the tomes of letters that he's written over the past 2.5 decades.
Well, yeah. And they're not just that he's done it, but they are like the gold standard of what we want people to shoot for.
Yeah.
Not to puff you up, but it's just so cool to see how the Lord used your willingness and obedience to really bring about such fruitful communication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have talked about Kenton before in the podcast.
We certainly have, just not by name.
Yeah.
But But Kenton, what you said brings up several thoughts for me. The first is actually, we really feel like this whole scarcity and abundance mindset is so important that we actually later on the season, in season 4, we're going to have some episodes dedicated to that. We've actually already got one recorded that will speak to that. And then to that, you talked about just the mindset and how your mindset really matters. And that's something that Mary said as well. I think that her example was, can either carry something in the sense of, oh gosh, I've got to find a way to raise $5,000, or, okay, I need $5,000. And that could all come from one place. I don't know, so the way you think about it really matters.
Yeah. And I like that you said, Kenton, that this isn't just a missions thing. This is a church thing.
Yeah.
But there is something unique about fundraising that brings you face to face with that reality. And you have to wrestle with and embrace that, he does own the cattle on 1,000 hills. And that applies to to my reality in my moment right now as well. It's not just something in a text somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And on that scarcity and abundance element, we even get scared that, oh, we've got too much, or God brings forth the abundance, and then we're scared to show our supporters the abundance. I remember some traveling ministers came to our church, and they were sharing his father passed away, and part of the estate, there was a Mercedes car that was inherited by this minister. And he hesitated to drive a Mercedes to his next speaking engagement because it screams abundance, and we're so scared of the people who are locked into poverty mentality. He said, I can't show up like that. Well, he did show up like that. And he had the best offering that he'd experienced in his ministry, coming out of that church at that particular point. Again, there is no scarcity in heaven. There is a principle. The Word of God, Luke 6:38, Jesus said, give and it shall be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over shall men give unto your bosom. We need to teach generosity amongst those who are going. It's awful easy to lock into, well, I've got to raise 50,000 and therefore, and I'm at 38 or I'm at 28 or I'm at 3, I can't afford to sow to another minister, or I can't afford foolishly to pay my tithe. I can't afford this. And I'm going to launch into a story where God brought support from a totally unexpected source, but it was out of a little gesture of obedience on my part for sowing. Before I went on the field, I had an antique shop. And one of the things, interestingly, that I specialized in were buttons, clothing buttons, but dating back from the 1940s to the 1800s. And so I did a program on clothing buttons for an antique organization, a collector's club in my hometown. One of the buttons that was a pride and joy of my collection is what's called a paperweight button. And if you've ever seen a glass paperweight, often with globs of glass inside that look like flowers and intricately designed, okay, now put that down into a 1/4-inch button, and exquisite workmanship, exquisite detail. I've had one in my life. And Mary Lee came up to me after the program. She said, Kenton, if you ever decide to sell that, my husband and I collect paperweights, and we would love to have something like that. And I said, well, Mary Lee, you'll be first on the list if I ever do decide to sell it. And we went our ways. I was driving home, and the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, give that button to Dick and Mary Lee. And so I went home, wrote a card, wrapped it up, and I dropped it off at their house the next day. No one answered the door. I left it on a porch, a little table outside their side porch. I did not realize that they come and go through a garage. And so they didn't spot this gift on the patio till that night when they hosted their Bible study. And friends came in and said, you guys have a present out here. What? Bring it in. And so they opened that gift in the presence of about 8 couples who were in their Bible study together. And so then Mary Lee told them the story and how touched she was. And that I had told her, I said, Mary Lee, I can't sell this, but I can readily give it. And I want to bless you and Dick with this. And so she called me and thanked me, one, for the gift. And she said, why don't you come? Because so many people heard about you. Why don't you come to our Bible study and share what's happening, what's on your heart? Because it came out. I had just been called to the field maybe a month before I did this program. And she said, come and share with us. guys out of that study, where I knew 2 of the 6 or 8 couples that were in there, it depended on the week, of course, came $225 in monthly support my first year, and over $325 in successive years a month.
Wow.
With a lot of one-time gifts coming out of that.
Yeah.
All out of obedience of what was a $25 button.
Yeah.
That's the God we serve. That's the connections he's working out in our lives, putting us in the right place at the right time, even when you need 50,000 and you're sitting at 22,000 and you say, God, I'm at the end of my list. God has more people. One of the couple who was most generous and most consistent in their sowing all 25 years that I was abroad, they were with me. And I would not have presumed upon our acquaintanceship to have sent them my initial fundraising letter. That's how good God is and the doors that he But be ready to sow.
Yeah.
The word's very clear. Give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall man give unto your bosom. God is using man to bring forth that increase.
Right. Yeah. You're not called to hoard it. You're never called to hoard.
Yeah. Well,
absolutely.
What I love about what you just shared, Kenton, is even though it was a story that didn't directly relate to something you heard from Mary, it actually is 100% building trust, not working an angle, not trying to do the things to get somebody to trust you, but just being obedient to the Lord, which then does build trust with people.
Right.
And Andy and I talk a lot about how it's not about the money. It's about the formative work that the Lord is doing in you, in his church, in his bride globally. And I just love that the invitation was for you to be obedient in something that really mattered to you. You said you've only had one of these buttons in all of your collecting. So it mattered to you. But in the giving of that, he formed your heart in generosity and obedience, and then opened all these doors, which is so cool.
Yeah. A really good connection to one of the things she mentioned. She introduces this idea of not just asking somebody right away as soon as you get to know them, but let them get to know you, let them like you, let them trust you, try a little bit, and then give, and then repeat, and then refer. So it's a process, right? It's really hard, I think, for a lot of people to say, wait, I have to get to know this person in the course of one conversation, and then I have to ask them to jump into an extended partnership relationship over time. It's a hard thing to make that leap from, hi, my name is Kenton. Would you like to support me?
I'm glad you mentioned this, Andy, because as I listened to what she shared, I was thinking of when we're fundraising and we're coached, get a list. Who are all the people you know?
Yes.
And let's work through. Some are going to be very easy sells, as it were, and others aren't going to sow at all. But let's ask. And I thought, oh my goodness, it's kind of like the relative who you only hear from when there's trouble in their life, and they need, we need funds. Can you help at all? Mary's in the hospital, whatever whatever your story is, Aunt Mary, and this kind of thing. And I was thinking along those lines, and I thought how important it is to maintain relationship with people, regardless of their sowing, regardless of their giving to your cause, and how important it is to maintain relationship and not presume upon the idea, well, they're going to be with me, they'll stick this out.
Yeah.
It's take an interest in them along the way. It's not all about you.
Yeah.
It's not.
Right.
You need the funds and what you're doing and what you're sharing. And there's a big focus in terms of what we share. But make the inquiry. I appreciate the missionaries who reach out and say, tell me what's happening in your life. How can I be praying for you as my supporter? How can I be praying for your family? When you know there's been a crisis in their family, inquire about it. How did the hospitalization go? How is surgery? How, someone was in recuperation. How are they now? Don't let your only point of contact be an appeal for money. Let your points of contact be person-driven and not finance-driven.
What would you say to somebody, Kenton, who is 10 years into their ministry and they're starting to see their donors kind of taper off and they haven't been doing good at this? What advice would you give them?
I would encourage them to reach out without news, hey, I'm going under, or I may have to come back to the States or North America, wherever you're based, to raise funds. I would reach out on a personal basis and simply, I wouldn't mention money. Get one letter out there, and not a newsletter, a personal letter, a personal email. Tell a story, tell something that's happened on the field, and inquire about their family. I haven't heard about James and Mary since their second baby, and I know there's 2 more babies. Tell me about them and grandparents. And reestablish kinship and relationship with people. Don't become the begging uncle. Don't become the deadbeat whoever who you only hear from when there's a need. Don't even express the need. God knows the need. Take the need to God, but express care and interest in others who maybe felt neglected along the way. Someone 10 years in, it's quite possible there's 10 years worth of support, and the only thanks they get is a newsletter saying, oh, thank you, everyone, for your support. And this family may have, or this couple, this single, may be living very simply so that others can live eternally. And an acknowledgement, a personal acknowledgement of that carries a lot of weight. And so I, if you mention finances at all, I would say it solely in thank you for your support of my ministry in the past. These stories are your stories. And that is something that, regarding building of trust, is share ownership of your ministry with your supporters.
Absolutely.
Virtually any time I've spoken to a church or a Bible study, a group where I know there is financial support coming out of that group, I share tonight, you're going to hear stories from the field that I was there, I was involved, but recognize these stories are your stories. There's 2 parts to this. There's going and there's sending. And you, as senders, the person who gives a glass of water to the prophet receives a prophet's reward. That's a glass of water Jesus was talking about. That's a widow's mite. And there's a reward that trails the missionary that is for the goers, for the senders, for those who made your going possible. Share ownership. Let them know that your hands are their hands. And it touches the heart. It warms the heart. I had a woman write to me after I sent a Christmas letter and a card sharing a personal story like this, or from the field. And I just reminded, this story is your story. And she said, Kenton, thank you so much, because of late, I've been looking at my life, and she was middle-aged at that time. She played piano for church on Sunday and was not sensing appreciation, not sensing. She was obedient to do what she knew to do, and sewing was one of those things, but no one was saying thank you for weekly rehearsing and coming in and playing the piano and blessing our congregation with worship music. And I thanked her for being a part of my ministry, and she said it meant the world to her.
Yeah. And the fact that you did that in person, just individually to her, that's different than just kind of putting it broadly in a newsletter and an email.
And guys, along that line, I will share that in 25 years, and I'm sure I can't make this a blanket statement, but it's a 97% statement. If I got a one-time gift, there was a thank you note that went out to that sewer.
Yeah.
And if it was $5, if it was $500, I wrote a personal thank you to that person. To my monthly supporters, I would do both a summer thank you letter and a Christmas card with a personal message to them. And I spent 3 days doing 96 Christmas cards and 90 Christmas cards and 105 Christmas cards to get out to my supporters. But guys, I look at 3 days to secure $50,000 in financing.
Right.
That's and
time well spent.
It's an excellent investment, and it touches the individual, touch them, let them know personally that they're appreciated.
Yeah. And don't assume that your donors are necessarily making that connection. Like some people might see that, might read your stories or your newsletters and think, oh, I'm a part of that. But most people are going to benefit, I think, from that very specific reminder that this is your story too. I love that reminder there.
Absolutely, Andy.
And it's just always so helpful to be reminded and brought back to this place of realizing, despite all the noise and all the things happening, there is gospel work happening and you are part of it.
Yeah.
And because it's just so easy to get sucked into
routine and
life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to share something else by way of encouragement to those of you who have widow's mites sewers. I have a lady, she's $10 a month for years. And we know there's not a lot going to happen with $10. There's not a lot going to happen with 120 over the course of a year. But you don't despise the small gifts.
Yeah.
A story that came out of the nation I most recently served in, I was playing pool with a friend one night. And through that game or that evening that we were there, a young man started a conversation with us, had very good English, and wanted to, we just got to talking, what are you doing here? I teach English at the university, etc. And it turns out he lived in my neighborhood. And we saw each other periodically then after that pool table or that pool game experience. And we became good friends. We became friends and good friends, and then BFFs. I had to look it up. I'm old, guys, best friends forever. And he's a third of my age. And so my teammates, and he had 4 BFFs forever, etc. Yeah. There came a point in his life where we did a lot of life with him for a year and a half. And there came a point in his life where he was ready to hear the gospel message and ready to receive the gospel message. And I look back now and I said, because as you shared, Andy, I've lived on support all 25 years that I've been abroad. One of my supporters put the 50 cents on the table that reserved the table for play by my friend and me, that introduced me to that young man and ultimately impacted eternity out of a 50-cent pool game.
Yeah.
And share stories like that. There's lots of things that happened over a lunch. What overseas, often a lunch is a $4 investment in someone.
Right.
Tell your supporters. Tell the ones who give $10 and don't minimize their gift. Just say, let me tell you, I invested $4 in a lunch with a friend who, because of that, we ended up going for coffee, another $1.65, and he heard the gospel for the first time in his life.
Yeah.
Let people know about finances, investments, what things, how you use some of their money.
Yeah.
And it's an encouragement to those who can't afford to do more than the widow's mite.
Yeah. And if you've been on the field for a while and you aren't in the habit of doing this, it's not too late.
Yeah.
You can start doing it. If you see your support starting to taper off, don't assume that things will right themselves automatically if you just keep doing the same things that you've been doing. You might need to course correct a little bit, and maybe this is one of the things you could do.
Yeah. What strikes me is it's just such a profound invitation to gratitude as well. I'm thinking about what you're sharing. I'm thinking about as you're present to what's happening and, how much this meal cost and how much it was to reserve this pool table. Then you go back to your home and you just look around and you think of everything that has been provided to you from those that have been sowing into your ministry, those that are giving. You look over at your couch. Maybe that couch held an important conversation or a friend that was grieving when they got hard news. I think that kind of evaluating your life in terms of like, wow, really, this is what your partnership has afforded. And even just thinking about it in those terms, what an opportunity to just stop and be grateful, for like a couch.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And to celebrate the blessing of doing ministry together.
Yeah.
And how much of that would you have foregone if you had just somehow financed your own way?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. My point at the very outset, God, I'll go, but I'm not writing that letter.
Yeah.
You let it be me. Okay, you get the pride out of the way and let God be God and his plans.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that part of the emphasis in this conversation has been on gifts that maybe could be easily overlooked because they're not the kind of like, whoa, that blows my mind that they gave that much kind of gift, But I think it's so important. And again, because I think that God is so intentional and kind in the way he provides for us, it just makes me wonder. I'm remembering a conversation from last season where we spoke with someone that was just talking about how it can be helpful to go to your donors and ask them to pray about an increase. And yes, maybe sometimes there is room to encourage people towards a level of generosity that feels sacrificial to them, or maybe that is what God is doing in some cases. But it's also just really cool to think about how God might never have somebody that gives you $5,000 at a time or even $500 a month. It might always be his provision through what seems like more people giving less. But what if that is for your own heart's ability to appreciate and see the little things, Because another conversation from last year, the Nichols received a $40,000 check to buy a car. And of course, there was a thank you note for that car. And of course, they appreciated and wow. But if you're not looking at your life through the lens of, what does this $10 afford me? Or what does this $25 afford me? Then you're not looking at your life through the lens of, it is all gift, right? It's easy to see gift in $40,000 for a car, but you're not necessarily as primed to look at your life and think, I had lunch today. I'm so grateful for this family that has provided for me to have lunch today, or something like that.
Yeah.
Totally. Andy, you need to have her on the show sometime.
Yeah. Noted.
Heather, I'm going to share another point of trust that God was so good. And at the time I went on the field, the profile to be in the nation where I was in the $18,000 range. It was cheaper to live there and get there and do a job than it was to live in the United States. And I mean, the fact that it's cheaper isn't necessarily a surprise, but it's just like the profile was very reasonable. And by the third year that I was in that nation, I was fully subscribed for the coming school year. And I went to one of my supporting churches because I knew they had other missionaries and other projects in other places. And I told Pastor, I said, Steve, here's where I am. I want you to know this so that in the coming year, if there's a need in the church that you feel, let's redirect finances, I am covered for this next school year. I welcome your continued support, but if there's a need for a hiatus, please be aware of that. And I said, I'm fully subscribed for 1 year ahead of schedule.
Wow, yeah.
And his response was, bless God, that's how it should be. And the church raised their support to me that year. And that's how things work in God's economy. But I felt, especially with that church, to let it be known that I'm covered.
Yeah.
And so trusting that information to them, that I'm abounding at this point, brought more abundance.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Just do what you think is right? Like as the Spirit leads you, you're not in danger.
Yeah, right. It's not a threat.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That makes me think of, earlier in this conversation, you were speaking to generosity and how important it is to really be postured in generosity, even when you're living on support. And we have a conversation also in season 4 that's upcoming that will be coming out in a few weeks with Danny and Stephanie Gutierrez. And they talk about that. They talk about how when they hit the bottom line of what they needed to survive, that's when they really got excited about fundraising, because anything above that they could be generous with. And it just strikes me that why wouldn't God position his people to be generous?
Yeah.
And that's not to put a burden on anybody listening, but to just say he does that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
Heather, on that note, I'll piggyback a little bit here. I was so blessed, again, early in my ministry, that helped pave the way for me in the future in terms of decisions and heart attitude toward things. There was a couple who had sowed to my ministry account, and then they wrote me a personal letter and said, here's a check. This is Kenton money. You go and take your family out to eat, you buy luggage, you use it for once because God wants you to know how loved you are, and he wants you to enjoy something special on us. And that, when I would hear other missionaries share at churches as I'm back home or have opportunity to meet them elsewhere, and when God puts it on my heart to sow, almost always it's without, I will present a check or cash to them. And I said, guys, I trust that your needs are met and that this can be personal money, that this can be something that is special to you. And it can be spent in, well, it's, again, so maybe $200 at the time. But I said, if you spend that all in one evening at a nice restaurant and that brings you happiness, that would bring me happiness. Be blessed in the name of the Lord with this fund. And if they needed it for shoes for their kids, bless the kids. But I would give it to them and I say, let this be Andy money. Let this be Heather money. Let this be for you. If you're in a position, that would be a blessing.
Yeah. That's really
I
cool.
love that last idea, especially.
Andy money. Well, you know what? If we ever get a kickback from the podcast, I'll send it your way.
Okay. Yes. Well, we need to have some advertising first, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, Kenton, did you have anything else from what Mary said that you really wanted to speak to?
you had sent me some advanced questions, and one of the questions was, did anything surprise you in
Yes.
this presentation? And or something that helped me see life in a different way, or this fundraising in a different way. And Mary shared that Facebook is the number one fundraising platform that's out there.
That is surprising.
And guys, I'm 62. And I learned to type on typewriters. I still use a typewriter, as well as a computer. But that's just my age. I missed electrification of my high school by 2 years, electrification of my college by 1 year. I just was behind all the way with technology. And 25 years ago, when I was talking with my sending organization and we're drafting that first letter, I'm sending them a hard copy in the mail because I did not have a computer.
Right.
Email, and they would send back and say this revision, or they'd call and say, okay, look at this and this. And so I've done all of this without Facebook, and God's been good. I'm not saying don't use Facebook. Work within your organization's means.
Parameters.
Now, but let me flip that for a minute for the generations after me who don't know what writing a letter is, who don't receive personal letters, who don't receive even Christmas cards, that things that are just, it's lost, not necessarily art, it's just a lost part of our culture.
Yeah.
What does come in your mail, junk mail and bills.
Yep.
What would speak out to someone, even a Gen Z or a Gen X, or I don't even keep up with all that. So they're all behind me, trailing behind me. And here's a letter, handwritten letter, inquiring about you, inquiring about your family.
Yeah.
Electronic communication obviously serves a purpose in terms of immediacy. But when I read of a death notice on Facebook, which I scan once in a while, I got on Facebook to go to church during the pandemic.
Sure.
And I probably have 6 friends now. And so sometimes I'll scan that. And so there's a notice, mom passed away. And the response is, oh, we're praying for you. One sentence that lacks depth, or worse, an emoji, a praying hand emoji. And that's the extent of your consolation to a family.
Yeah.
Invest in some cards for your supporters. Invest in thank you notes. Invest in, when there is a tragedy in their family, send a sympathy card, not an electronic submission.
Yeah.
Let them know you took time and your heart is touched by what they've gone through.
Yeah. That's good.
The time it takes to compose a letter, to compose a thank you note, get the address, stamp it, mail it. It's such a breath of fresh air to get something in the mail that is personal and not presumed personal. This Kenton, if you're tired of life the way it is, pursue this avenue. Junk mail,
right. Yeah.
Emotions that come across as your friends, and they're not.
Yeah.
Be a true friend to your supporter.
Yeah.
And consider options other than Facebook to express your gratitude, express your love, express your condolences when condolences are called for.
But that doesn't sound very easy, Kenton.
Well,
3 days of Christmas cards every year, Andy.
Well, and
that's true.
And maybe it's not meant to be.
I don't think so.
Not to knock on sometimes how there can be efficiencies, and that can be a good and blessed thing.
Yeah.
But when I think of what Kenton just said, realizing that one of the most precious resources we have to give is our attention and our presence, and thinking about the way Jesus gave his attention and presence. Like if anybody could have justified just kind of like sending word or doing something without, like he could heal without physical presence, but often he was physically there.
Yeah.
Right? Often he was there speaking on his own behalf, not just sending word, right? So it's just, I don't know, again, not to over realize, like we're not, anti-social media, we're not anti-efficiencies, but to your statement of, yeah, but that's not easy. And maybe the point it's not supposed to be. And maybe that's
what makes it meaningful, actually.
Well, yeah.
Right.
And really like forms us to see the consequence of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It should cost you something to say thank you.
Yeah.
Right?
Well said. Heather, you should have Handy on the show. Andy, you should have Heather on the show.
We'll work on it.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
He books up.
Yeah.
Well, Kenton, this has been a really wonderful conversation. And I don't know, Andy, speaking of having people on the show, we might just have to have Kenton back for his own episode.
I feel like we've just scratched the surface, the Kenton surface.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Well, now that I've done, this is my first podcast ever, guys. That's how behind the times I am with tech and everything. Now that I've done it, I say, oh, I could do this again.
Yeah. And you could go back and listen to all the other ones.
There you go. All that pride that I dispensed with, I could go in and listen intentionally for it now.
That's right.
Andy and Heather's favorite.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, this has been a really fruitful conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Kenton.
Thank you, guys. It's been a blessing. Bye-bye.
It's Not About the Money is presented by Provisio Fundraising Solutions. Provisio equips support-based workers with flexible training, practical resources, and one-on-one coaching. Find out more at provisiofundraising.com.